When you look at the heart, we have the two atria up here on the top, and we have the two ventricles. How do these atria know when to contract and relax, and the ventricles know when to contract and relax? Well, in the next series of videos, we're going to be looking at action potentials in the heart and the way that the heart regulates when it contracts and when it relaxes. We're going to see that in areas such as here that you see in gold, that you're going to have autorhythmic cells that can actually set their pace. SA node specifically right here can set the pace of the heart, and they do this by spontaneously depolarizing at a certain rate. We'll see that this area represented here in the diagram, the SA nodal cells, and it's not just one cell, it looks like here, it's multiple, thousands of cells in the SA node. When it goes to generate a pace, we're going to see it's going to have action potentials that look like this here. Whereas the myocardial sites, or the contractile myocardial sites of the heart, are going to have action potentials that look more elongated, like this. We're going to see that there's a movement of ions, sodium, potassium, calcium, that are going through these channels within these cells in order to regulate how the heart contracts and when the heart contracts. This is going to be absolutely extraordinary when you learn how the heart can do this. The collection of autorhythmic cells that's important in setting the pace of the heart is called your sinoatrial node, or SA node. And it's considered the pacemaker of the heart because of all the autorhythmic cells, which you have here is the SA node, AV node, bundle of His, right and left bundle branch of Purkinje fibers. These are all made up of autorhythmic cells, but the SA nodal cells can spontaneously depolarize faster than the other autorhythmic cells. Since they have the fastest rate of depolarization, they set the pace for the rest of the heart. Thus, the SA node is known as the pacemaker of the heart. Now, the action of cardiac muscle tissue contracting on its own in the absence of neural stimulation is called automaticity. And what we're going to see is that these SA nodal cells, well, all autorhythmic cells, can spontaneously depolarize without innervation from nerves or without the influence of hormones. Now we're going to see that hormones and neurotransmitters are going to influence the rate at which these can depolarize, but they will depolarize on their own without any influence from outside factors. If you look at the rate at which autorhythmic cells depolarize, we see that the SA node, which is a normal pacemaker of the heart, the action potentials formed per minute are around 70 to 80, which is going to give you that 70 to 80 beats per minute of a heart, because that's the rate at which the SA node, normal pacemaker, will depolarize. Now the AV nodal cells would depolarize a little bit slower, at around 40 to 60 beats per minute. Bundle of His, Purkinje fibers, are at 20 to 40 beats per minute. Since the SA nodal cells are going to depolarize first, they're actually going to set the pace that the other autorhythmic cells will also depolarize at, because they're stimulating them faster than they can stimulate themselves under normal discharge of autorhythmic tissue. So again, when we're looking at action potentials in the heart, what we're going to do is we're going to start with the autorhythmic cells, the SA node, for example. We're going to start there, and we're going to look at how these action potentials form. And then later, we're going to look at the contractile myocardial sites and see how action potentials form there. It's important to note that in this diagram, it's showing cells of SA node, and it looks like one cell. It's not actually one cell. There are thousands of cells that make up the SA node. They're all close together. They're connected by gap junctions. To make it easier, they're just showing this and just calling them a bundle of cells. And the action potential we're going to see here looks like this right here, whereas the action potential we see in contractile cells of the heart are going to be here. But what tells those contractile cells to contract is going to come from stimulation by the SA node, or autorhythmic cells. In your notes, you're going to see a diagram such as this, where we're going to talk about autorhythmic cell here and the myocardial contractile cell here, and these are the various channels that we're going to see ions moving through. By the time we're finished, you should be able to fill out this diagram, both on the action potentials and pacemaker potentials of autorhythmic cells, as well as the action potential we're going to see in the contractile myocardial site. You'll see numbers in your notes where you're going to fill those out, and at the very end you'll take a test and fill out each of these areas to explain what's happening. This right here is going to show you a key, but you'll have the key available in your notes as well. So let's go ahead and begin. We're going to start with SA nodal cells, or autorhythmic cells. In these autorhythmic cells, we have what's called basic action potentials here. This phase of it is called specifically the action potential, Whereas this phase here is called the pacemaker potential. And the pacemaker potential has the opening of two basic types of channels, which are represented here. This autorhythmic cell is a single cell, but remember, when you look at the SA node, for example, there are thousands of cells that make up the SA node. We're just pulling out one of them. This area here, at minus 60 millivolts from the preceding action potential, it comes down. We say at minus 60, this cell is hyperpolarized, and at minus 60 millivolts, a type of channel is going to open up called a voltage-gated sodium channel. And when it opens, sodium is going to flow from down an electrochemical gradient from outside to inside. Sodium flows in. As that sodium flows in, that's going to cause this to go from minus 60 and become less negative. Well, a strange thing happens with this voltage-gated sodium channel. You also have potassium leaving, but less potassium leaves than sodium comes in. So overall, you have a net depolarization during this phase where you have voltage-gated sodium channels opening. Now we're also going to see that these voltage-gated sodium channels are called IF channels, as well as HCN channels. The IF stands for funny channels, I is for current, and HCN stands for hyperpolarization, activated, cyclic nucleotide gated channel. And we'll talk more about these later on. Well, as this depolarizes up to around minus 50 millivolts, that's when these voltage-gated sodium channels begin to close and another type of channel opens. They're called T-type calcium channels. And calcium, flowing down its electrical chemical gradient, is going to go from the outside of the cell to the inside. And as it does that, it continues to depolarize up to minus 40 millivolts. It's referred to as T-type, T meaning transient. They're not open very long, so that's why they get their name transient, only there for a short period of time. Well, once you hit minus 40 millivolts, those T-type calcium channels are shut. And by then, all of your voltage-gated sodium channels are also shut. What opens up at minus 40 millivolts is an L-type calcium channel. And calcium, again, moves in down its electrochemical gradient. Well, as this calcium moves in, it quickly depolarizes all the way up to near positive 20 millivolts, at which time the L-type calcium channel slams shut. Now we call this L-type for long-lasting because it opens up longer than the T-type calcium channel. Once that L-type calcium channel has slammed shut at positive 20 millivolts, you have voltage-gated potassium channels opening up. When those potassium channels open, potassium is going to flow down its electrical chemical gradient, but it's going to go from the inside of the cell to the outside. And during that, those positive charges leaving are going to repolarize this back down to minus 60 millivolts. Minus 60 millivolts, we refer to that as hyperpolarization. And at minus 60 millivolts, what type of channel is going to open up as those voltage-gated potassium channels slam shut? Going to be the voltage-gated sodium channels are going to open up again. And at that time, you're going to have sodium coming in and potassium going out. More sodium in than potassium out. So you have a net influx of sodium, a net influx of positive charge, which is going to depolarize it all the way up to minus 50 millivolts. Then at minus 50 millivolts, they're going to start to close those voltage-gated sodium channels. And what channel opens up? The T-type calcium channel again. Calcium comes in to depolarize it further up to minus 40 millivolts. At minus 40 millivolts, both T-type calcium channels, as well as any remaining voltage-gated sodium channels, are shut. L-type calcium channels open. Calcium continues to move in, depolarizing it all the way up to positive 20 millivolts, at which time the L-type calcium channels slam shut. Potassium channels, voltage-gated potassium channels open. Potassium leaves, which repolarizes that all the way back down to minus 60 millivolts, which we refer to as hyperpolarization. There is no resting membrane potential. Once you hit that minus 60 millivolts, the potassium channels slam shut, then voltage-gated sodium channels open, and it continues on and on and on. Why do we have this? Because that is the pacemaker of the heart. We're going to see that as some of that sodium and calcium comes in, some of that sodium and calcium is going to go through this gap junction that's connecting this autorhythmic cell to the myocardial contractile cell. And we're going to see that's going to start an action potential that moves down through the myocardial sites, the contractile cells. And as that action potential moves through those myocardial sites, they're going to contract. So what's telling these myocardial sites that are found in the ventricles, that are found in the atria, to contract. It's these autorhythmic cells. And they're sending impulses down through those autorhythmic pathways in order to tell the contractile cells when to contract. Remember, autorhythmic cells do not have thick and thin myofilaments. They're not a nerve. They're a specialized myocardial sites for conducting action potentials. When you get to the contractile cells here, we're going to see that there are thick and thin myofilaments, and those are the cells that contract. And the action potential is going to travel along the membrane of these myocardial sites is shown here. Whereas the action potential that forms in the autorhythmic cells is shown here. So after you've gone through this a number of times, then what you're going to do is you're going to take those blank sheets of paper you have in your notes and you're going to fill this out. And you're going to label this and go through all the parts. Well, before we go into what's happening with the action potentials in the contractile cells, which we see here, we're going to go ahead and do some more information on these autorhythmic cells.